Raanan Levy, and I'm talking to you live here on Facebook. Thank you for joining. After several very tense days here in Israel, I got a few phone calls and a few text messages from friends around mostly America, of course, and some other places in Europe. People wanting to know that we are safe, and we are indeed safe. But I want to give a little bit of a perspective of the events of the past week. Last week, two things collided. There was an event that was supposed to take place yesterday, which took place. It's called Jerusalem Day. It's a very festive event with many thousands of Israelis from all over the country come to Jerusalem to celebrate the Six-Day War and the return of the Jewish people to the eastern side of Jerusalem, and of course to the Temple Mount and the Western Wall. And those were big events in our history, and they are commemorated every year. This year, what happened was that the timing of Jerusalem Day fell right on the last few days of Ramadan, the holy Muslim holiday of fasting during the day and feasting at night and so forth, which is followed by most of the Muslim people very peacefully and very nice festive time in Israel for Arabs and for Jews celebrating Jerusalem Day. The senior command of the Jerusalem Police Department and those that are in charge of public security decided that in order to mobilize large masses of people who come to the old city at once, Arabs to pray in the Temple Mount like they do on Ramadan, Jews that come to the old city as we do on the Jerusalem Day, in order to ensure the public safety when literally tens of thousands of people are coming together into the city. And the police is in charge of ensuring that it will flow smoothly and so forth. And that was one issue that started some kind of controversy when the Jerusalem city and the Jerusalem Police Department, like in every city in the world where there is an event of this magnitude, the police is in charge to determine the escape routes, the access routes, and so forth, to ensure public safety. And the city of Jerusalem went ahead and placed some fences, some metal fences, like you see in concerts, like you see in museums, like you see in demonstrations and protests, in order to contain large traffic, large masses of people coming to the old city all at once. In addition to that, last week, the Palestinian Authority wanted to conduct their Palestinian elections, which have not taken place for many years because Abu Mazen and the Palestinian Authority are not interested to have elections. And in order to be able to blame Israel for all that, they went ahead and asked Israel to allow the Israeli citizens of East Jerusalem that are mostly Arab to participate in the Palestinian elections. Obviously, Israel did not allow this. Just like no other country, I don't think that France would have allowed a French citizen minority to participate in a vote of another country or another political entity. No one would have allowed this. And the Israeli government determined that East Jerusalem will not be included in the Palestinian elections. In retaliation for this decision, Abu Mazen, the energetic and totally irrelevant leader, so-called, of the Palestinian Authority, blamed Israel for the cancellation of the elections, and all of that came into one big melting pot at once, where on one hand you have the Israeli celebrations of Jerusalem Day, tens of thousands of Muslims coming to the old city because of Ramadan, and Hamas and the Palestinian Authority fighting each other who will tax Israel more for canceling the elections. Of course, in all of those situations, it's very natural to think that Israel should have not placed the fences, Israel should have allowed the elections. This is all a bunch of crap. Israel should not have allowed any elections in its territory. And East Jerusalem, as everybody knows, is Israel's capital city. And no Arab will ever vote for anything else than the Israeli parliament on election day. And Hamas took the opportunity to threaten Israel that if the elections will not be allowed in Jerusalem, they will attack Israel. Additionally, a very small group, but very violent group of Palestinian demonstrators decided that they don't like the fences that the Israeli police and the city of Jerusalem placed in the entrances of some of the main gates into the old city. And you had the perfect storm of some clashes and so forth. Well, on Thursday it started with Hamas starting to fire a few rockets, and it went and started to escalate and so forth. Israel sent warnings to the Hamas, stop firing the rockets. Of course they didn't. And yesterday there was a significant escalation in those rockets. I think it would be accurate to say that just today, to give you some proportion, over 600 rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip on dozens of Israeli towns and cities, and the result was putting hundreds of thousands of Israelis in bomb shelters. And you need to understand the pictures. I shared an hour ago a short message showing what happens when you stand in a restaurant and the sirens go off. People are actually horrified. Normally it means you have just a few seconds to run for your life. Of course, we're very, very grateful, and we thank God for the most cutting-edge Israeli technology in the form of Iron Dome and our ability to do this miracle of intercepting enemy missiles in the air and destroying them. Out of 600 missiles that Hamas fired just today, 150 exploded inside Gaza. They didn't even leave the Gaza area. But another 450 missiles were fired, mostly in open fields because they're not very accurate. Most of them were intercepted as well in the air, defending the lives of thousands and thousands of people in each and every city. We're talking maybe 40 small towns and 10, 15 major towns in Israel that were hit just today. And unfortunately, we lost two ladies in Ashkelon, elderly women who could not run to the bomb shelter, were killed today in Ashkelon. Another one was killed about an hour ago in the town of Rishon LeZion. So in this round, we're already counting 3 Israeli civilians, 3 innocent people in their homes being killed by Hamas fire. This is not a game, and this is not something that is taken lightly. Israel has started to attack Hamas targets in Gaza, and I want to tell you with the most authority and accuracy, these are surgical attacks against terrorists in their headquarters, in their bunkers, in the underground tunnel infrastructure that is zigzagged all across the Gaza Strip, that was built over years. Instead of feeding their people, instead of providing education, instead of developing the beautiful Gaza coastline, which could have been heaven for the Palestinians, they turned it, the warlords called Hamas and the other leaders of the Palestinian Authority have turned the Gaza Strip into one large arsenal of rockets aimed at me, at my family, at my friends, and of course at the soldiers of the IDF. One of the things that is most mind-boggling, I must say, is the insane, literally insane, United States reaction to all this. I heard today that the United States is calling all sides to use restraint. And you know, I'm very balanced normally. I don't get into personal politics like Trump or Biden or this and that. But there are 9 million Israelis now sitting in bomb shelters because of the barbaric ongoing. This has been going for 20 years of Hamas rockets. Before that, 80 years of Arab terrorism against Jews, even before the State of Israel was even founded. In the 1920s, in the 1930s, in the 1940s, and so on. Every decade, there are atrocious attacks of Arabs and Palestinians against Israelis and Jews. And this is still going on. Is there an Israeli that is aiming a rocket on a civilian town? Is there an Israeli organization that goes ahead in East Jerusalem and pulls out Arab women out of the cars and beats them up? There's been about 50 events in Israel, not by Hamas, not by Palestinian terrorism, by Israeli Arabs who identify with Hamas. Fortunately, we're talking about a small percentage, but a very dangerous and violent minority of Arab Israelis. I say again, 95% of Israeli Arabs are good, proud Israeli citizens. But the few that are inciting, the few that are being paid by Hamas and by the Islamic Brotherhood, and by all sorts of paramilitary groups in Gaza and Sinai, in Hezbollah in Lebanon and so forth, are encouraging those mostly youngsters, people in their teenagers and very young Arabs in their 20s, pull out people from their cars and beat the hell out of them, just sporadically, just randomly picking someone and beating them up. This is not a crime of like you're used to, like carjackings by criminals and so forth. This is a anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, deliberate attack on Israel, on Israeli citizens, on innocent people going to work. And to hear from the United States this supposedly balanced idea of calling the sides to use restraints is an insult to Western civilization. It's a win. It's how can you be a moderator or a mediator between the fire and the arsonist, between the fire and the firefighter? We are defending our cities. We pulled out of Gaza. Many of us think till this day that it was a grave mistake. There's no doubt that these serious abilities of Hamas to terrorize such large areas in Israel over time are possible because of the pullout from Gaza that we did in 2005 by Ariel Sharon. And I was advisor to Prime Minister Sharon when he made that decision, and I remember vividly he used to say, the pullout from Gaza will give Israel political legitimization to attack the enemy, and it will put pressure on the Palestinians to make peace with us. Obviously, unfortunately, I have a lot of respect, and I love Sharon very much. He passed away several years ago, but we are eating now the results of the pullout from Gaza, which was irresponsible, and we knew that there would be rockets on Tel Aviv. I'm sitting now at a Holmes friend. I'm sitting now at a Holmes friend in a town called Kfar Saba, just north of Tel Aviv. On my way here from my house, I had to stop the car and run to a little ditch 3 times because of sirens and rockets being intercepted in the air right over my head. And now I'm sitting here in Kfar Saba, and I felt this urge to share with you the idea that this is not something new. Arabs and Islam is a huge threat on the world. Sometimes it's in the form of the Shiite Iranian empire of the Ayatollahs. Sometimes it is the Sunni rebels in Yemen, or Hamas in Gaza, or Hezbollah in Lebanon. Wherever these people are, whatever they will have, they will turn this into arms to terrorize others. In this case, it's Israel. And I hope that you will share this thing in the thousands. We are sick and tired of this political hypocrisy. Nobody here is worried about Hamas. Nobody. We're going to handle them. And trust me, within another day or two, they will be very, very sorry for this round. My purpose for putting out this message is the hypocrisy that we're beginning to hear again from Washington, and we're already hearing from the European Union, all this restraint nonsense. I wonder what would happen if France had a neighbor that fires 600 rockets a day on Lyon or Paris. What would happen if some terror group in Mexico would fire 400 rockets on Houston or San Antonio? Israel would have issued a message to the sides to use restraint, or Israel would side immediately with America and even with France and insist that they will defend themselves by eliminating, eradicating, and destroying their enemy without hesitation. This international hypocrisy coming from our friends must stop. And as for the Arab Israelis who participated in those lynch attempts, this is a very serious escalation. Again, it's contained to very radical shoulders of the Arab society in Israel. They will all be prosecuted. They will all go to jail. They will all serve decades in prison for those lynch attempts that gladly none of them ended in a murder, but were very, very close to that. And this is a long haul, my friends, and I want to call every friend of Israel now to pray for the brave soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces that we love so much. And I'm proud to be alumni. Our children are now doing the work we used to do. I did the work my dad used to do. And this is an ongoing generational thing, like passing on the baton. I want to call on all the Israeli troops in the air, in the sea, and in the land, those that are now working very hard, thousands of which are risking their lives for me, and for you, and for America, and for Europe. And I hope that those of you here that I know mostly are big, big friends of Israel will raise your voice to your elected officials, to your congressmen, to your president, to your governors, and insist to stop this hypocritic diplomatic language of using restraints and all that nonsense. This is an insult to every Israeli, to every member of the international community of Western Alliance, of free democracies. This cannot be. And I ask President Biden, next time that Palestinians fire at my house, next time that Palestinian fires on kindergartens, next time that hundreds of rockets a day are being fired on Israeli population, before you tell us to use restraints, ask yourself, what would you do as the chief in command of the United States Army had there been one American city under attack of 500 or 600 rockets a day? Would you use restraint? This hypocrisy must stop. And I turn back now to our allies and to our friends. Israel will handle its enemies. We always did. We always handled our enemies. You all know what happened to Israel in the last 80 years. While holding a sword in one hand, we made this country one of the best countries in the world. We're not worried about our enemies. We are frustrated with the low morals, the low level of faith, the low standards of our allies and our friends. You need to side with Israel now, your only democratic and true ally in the Middle East. Loud and clear, and every Hamas terrorist that is about to push a button now to fire another missile at me should know that the United States of America is totally on Israel's side. And you guys in Europe, with your European Union, that removes Israeli products from the shelves because they were made in Judea and Samaria and all that crap also. You need to defend yourself also from your leadership and from that sick, Hague International Tribunal, from the BDS, from all those anti-Semitic and anti-Israel groups that are playing the game of denouncing Israel for things, while in reality they're anti-Semites, they're anti-Israel. If Israel would not have been in Judea and Samaria, they would have found something else. We know that because the hate towards Jews has been alive from time immemorial. And what you hear from today from the EU, from the BDS, and from other anti-Israel group is just another form of anti-Semitism that our people has suffered from for thousands of years. We're not surprised. We didn't see anything new in the past few days. You know, it's good to hear the news and to read stuff, and take it from me, nothing happened that did not happen before. There were always religious, stirred, and provoked unrest on the Temple Mount. Many years, it happened many times. It happened many times that Israeli Arabs participated in lynching bypassers, again in small numbers, but even that is not a new thing. And it's not a new thing that different governments, like in Europe, and unfortunately we're hearing some very troubling news from Washington in the past 2-3 months. You know, this whole ridiculous idea of renegotiating the nuclear deal with Iran, potentially promoting Palestinian state again. How did that happen? It took Israel 30 years to get that off the table. And again, those people that introduced it 10, 20 years ago with Arafat and Gallas into another war are doing the same now. By the way, it has something to do with this also. The Arabs are thinking that Israel is weak because of the democratic process of our elections and the deadlock in the Israeli political system. They are wrong. It doesn't matter who will be the Prime Minister of Israel, who will be the Minister of Defense of Israel. It just doesn't matter. All Israeli prime ministers had to deal with Palestinian and Arab animosity and terrorism, acts of terror towards Israel. And no matter who will be the Israeli Prime Minister or Minister of Defense next month, next year, or 35 years from now, they're going to have to deal with these things as well. Again, I want to say to you two things. First of all, I want you to hear the news correctly. Nothing is new. I want you to know that messages that come out from your State Department, like we call on the parties to use restraints, are a disgrace to America. And the second thing I want to tell you is that I'm a part of a group that is promoting settlements and Jewish settling of Jews in Judea and Samaria. You know, Judea and Samaria is the heartland of Jewish culture and Jewish religion. Almost everything that is Jewish took place in Judea and Samaria. Hebron, Jerusalem, Elon Moreh, Shiloh. Look up those places and see Jewish history going backwards for 2,000-3,000 years. Everybody knows that. To think that because we are here, there's some trouble with the Arabs is being naive in the better case, and trying to disinform others in the worst case. I want to thank you for supporting Israel. I want to thank you for partnering with Israel. And I want to, don't be discouraged by the events in America in the past year. We need to take a deep breath. We need you. Israel needs you. Judea and Samaria needs you. And I think that the State Department and the White House, they also need you. Don't get tired. This is not for the faint of heart. This is for people with faith, strength, people who have a history and a future to get up in the morning for. This is what I teach my children. This is what I teach in my community. This is what we were taught when we were standing in lines in the IDF. We're never ever going to give up or lose that spirit. I want to thank everyone for praying for the peace of Jerusalem. God bless you. Bye-bye.